Hi, welcome to FutureFast. And for those of you who are here for the first time, this is an effort to bring in people who are doing things that are bound to have an impact on the future. And also, there are voices who keep nudging us or pointing us to uh, things, a direction which are not on the popular side because they seem to have a perspective of vision which is not in line with the popular thing, but possibly they are the voices which are bound to be real. Uh, how real we'll perhaps also discover with someone like Paul, who's our today's guest. And Paul is, like I gave away that this is a contrarian voice, but a very quick introduction is he's a chemical process development expert and in his own words, which I found it fantastic, is antidote to marketing hopium, hopium spelled with an H. And he's a tireless advocate for fossil fuel free future, which you will discover in the course of our conversation. So, with that, Paul, welcome to Future Fast, and thank you so much for making time to be here with us.
Oh, you're welcome, and looking forward to speaking with you today.
Well, Paul, can you start with your journey of being a process engineer to the advocate for fossil free fuel and not just that, but decarbonization efforts and strategic consulting also you do, right, in that?
Yeah. So, well, I mean, it started sooner than that. As early as high school, I was already very
Oh,
interested in environmental issues, and in high school, I was doing chemical photography. You know, the old style of photography where you take pictures and then you process the film and process the prints in the darkroom.
I
And
tried at it and I failed miserably.
Oh, well, I had two older brothers who were both doing it, and so I learned firsthand that it takes skill, but it doesn't the technical part of it was certainly something that we could all manage. And I got into color photography, and the problem with color photography was that although the results were good, most of the processing happens in the dark. So you put paper in a drum and then you pour chemicals in and out at certain times. And if you don't do that consistently, you don't get consistent results and you can't get the picture in your mind onto the paper that you want. So, of course, being a technical guy from a young age, I built a computer automated print processor to do that boring part so I could focus on the creative part. And
Uh,
I took that to the science fair, local science fair, and I won best engineering prize at the local science fair. And then I went to the national science fair, and I got a lot of encouragement there. And people were telling me that I should do chemical engineering, and I was thinking of doing chemistry. So chemical engineering, when I found out more about it, it sounded like a better fit, and so I went off and did chemical engineering at university. But this was a time in the late 1980s when people were really getting serious about climate change being a real thing. And it was obvious that it wasn't something we could just ignore. It wasn't, speculative. It was really happening. And so here I am trying to make plans for my future. And I'm in chemical engineering. And what do a lot of chemical engineers do, especially in Canada? They work for the fossil fuel industry. So I said, yep, not going to do that because that doesn't have a future. And here we are, whatever that is, 33 years later. And the fossil fuel industry is still here. To my great surprise, my classmates who ignored this advice had careers in the fossil fuel industry, ups and downs, peaks and valleys. But I stayed out of it. I mean, I had fossil fuel companies as customers through my various roles, especially for my in the 26 years that I spent designing and building pilot plants for the chemical process industry. But I never worked for them directly. And that was by strategy because, like I said, I know, eventually we're going to get serious about this because it's what else can we do? We have to get
Well,
serious about it. We have to have a stable
funnily,
climate.
Paul, when you mentioned that in the 80s, the climate change talk was very high, uh, it just occurred to me that this has been also cyclical, right? That noise about climate change, it was high in 80s, went down in 90s, came up in 2000, came down in 2010s, and again coming up in 2020s.
And guess what?
So
The,
it
the
seems to have a
hyperbole about
10-year cycle.
hydrogen is very well correlated. But you see, you have to go back even further. You have to go back to the 1970s. You have to go to the 1973 oil shock. The
Right,
1973 oil shock put everyone on notice that we were dependent on this stuff that was coming out of the ground in a way that they just, didn't appreciate.
good.
As someone said, Nate Hagen said in the podcast that I did, all of a sudden people woke up to realize that energy was important, as if, you could possibly imagine energy not being important. But after that oil shock, basically the whole world went crazy. What alternatives do we have? Can we build lots of nuclear? Okay, if we build nuclear, then how are we going to make the chemical energy that we need for various purposes? Because right now, all the chemical energy that we need is coming from fossils, gas, oil, petroleum, oil, and coal, sorry. And people, of course, went, well, what else can we burn aside from fossils? Why, hydrogen. And so there was a big peak of interest in the middle to late 1970s about hydrogen, and that was before global warming was really, people knew a little bit of the physics and were puzzled about it and were thinking about it, but it wasn't a firm worry yet. But 1980s, late 1980s, it was clear we have to stop emitting CO2. I mean, I remember sitting in a
No, but
departmental.
isn't it true back in the very early days of automobile, before the fossil fuel came in, when they started with electric cars, there was an effort to work on hydrogen. In fact, that was one of the considerations. They talked about building hydrogen cells around that time, and then, of course, discovery of
So
petrol.
the hydrogen fuel cell is a very old technology. I mean, it was invented around the same time as the electrolyzer, in the 1830s, but nobody was really thinking about using hydrogen for cars, I don't think. The lead acid battery and then later nickel iron, they were the popular choices for electric vehicles in the 1900 time frame. And in fact, people don't realize this, but electric vehicles were selling neck and neck with gasoline and diesel vehicles until about 1911. And what's funny is that this happens to be the day that Ketteridge, among many things that he invented, was the electric starter for the engine.
Right, right.
And so it's funny that an electric motor connected to a battery put an end to the electric motor connected to the battery driving the car and became the thing that just started the engine. So you didn't need to crank it and worry about breaking your wrist. But anyway, and people weren't really thinking about hydrogen for transport until the 1970s, really. And that's when it got really interesting. And the reason was that in the 1960s, something called the proton exchange membrane fuel cell was invented. Before that,
Right.
fuel cells were kind of a messy affair, aqueous or high temperature things, and they weren't suitable at all for transport. But when the PEM fuel cell was invented, people started messing around with the notion that maybe we could use hydrogen, again with the notion that we could get away from fossils, not because we were worried about climate change, but just because we were worried about where we would get them from. We didn't want to have to deal with people that had them in abundance and didn't want to give them away for free anymore. So, things change, technology changes, and it took 100 years, but eventually we invented a better battery than lead acid or nickel iron. And, cell phones took it to, and mobile electronics, laptop computers and so on, took it to the scale where it got cheap enough that people started seriously thinking, oh my goodness, maybe we can make electric cars using this, and it would actually be practical. And lo and behold, that's where we are now. And hydrogen for transport kind of got left in the dustbin of history. It just got superseded by a better technology. The difference, though, the difference between people will say, well, engines replaced batteries because engines were a better technology, right? And now batteries are replacing engines because once you think of climate change, batteries are a better technology. But maybe hydrogen, somebody will make some invention and make hydrogen better. And the problem is that they don't understand hydrogen the way I understand hydrogen. I worked with this stuff, since my undergraduate. I was using hydrogen in reactions, and I did my master's degree doing hydrogenations, and then for the whole rest of my career, with a period at the beginning that was associated with environmental technologies that I was working on. For decades, I was making and using hydrogen or synthesis gas, which is hydrogen mixed with carbon monoxide, in project after project after project after project. So I know this stuff pretty well. And when you get to know hydrogen well, you understand what's inherently wrong with it. And what's wrong with it can't be fixed by innovation. When you think about hydrogen's properties, it's never going to be an effective fuel, meaning one that's easy to store and transport and so on. And it's never going to be an efficient way to use electrical energy. In fact, it's not an efficient way to use chemical energy either. So those two things you can't fix. They're fundamentally broken.
Oh, well, before we get to this part, what got you to this part?
Yeah, well, okay, so a few steps. So when I graduated from university, of course, I didn't want to be in the fossil fuel industry. And being an environmentalist at heart, I thought, well, what should I do? I should get into the environmental industry. So one of my co-op work terms was with a company that was developing, originally, they were trying to make chemicals using sunlight. And, this was a noble kind of hippie goal to try to make chemicals with sunlight. And it's funny, it keeps coming back kind of like a zombie, one of the many zombie ideas out there. But these guys very quickly, they were smart, very smart people. And they realized it was much easier to destroy things with light than it was to make things with light. So they right away got into destroying things with light as a technology, and they developed a water treatment technology that used ultraviolet light to destroy organic chemicals that were in there that weren't supposed to be there. And so I helped them. When I graduated, I worked for several years helping to develop this technology, and we got a few patents and built a business, and it struggled, and we fought with people that didn't understand how it worked and weren't convinced that it did work and didn't want to pay for it even if it worked, and it was very frustrating. And from a management perspective, the company wasn't run very well either. They didn't understand kind of the role of people like me in a startup, where they can't pay you very well, but really they should be giving you some of the equity of the company. And eventually I got fed up and left. I couldn't stand being taken advantage of in the way that I was for years working there. So I went off to a consulting company that was actually trying to clean up contaminated sites. And I became their expert in advanced oxidation technologies, and also was working in the local office trying to clean up some sites that had been contaminated in history. And eventually I realized that business was, there's quite a lot of magical thinking going on in that business. There was a lot of technology focus in our company. We're trying to come up with technology that solves these problems. And in most cases, the right solution is just don't do anything. I mean, let me give you an example that I think make it very clear. So one of the big problems at the time in Ontario was there were all of these town gas sites all over Ontario. And these were places where people were gasifying coal in order to make street lighting gas, and then eventually it was gas used in homes. And it wasn't for years until these networks were replaced by natural gas, and electricity first for lighting, and then natural gas for heating, and so on. So these town gas sites were all over the place. And they would make coal tar, and they wouldn't make enough coal tar to make it marketable. So they would bury it in the back of the
Oh,
plant.
wow.
And if it's out of sight, it's out of mind. It's not going anywhere, right? So anyway, lo and behold, people want to build new buildings where these old places were, and they would dig and they would find this coal tar, and oh, now it's an environmental problem because they have these aromatic hydrocarbons in there that are,
Right.
cancer causing and worrisome, but they're not really very mobile. They don't dissolve in water. And
Mm-hmm.
so as a consequence, if you leave them there, they kind of don't do anything. And no one's eating the dirt, so it's really not an issue. But we spent millions upon millions of dollars digging up these old sites. And then what would we do with them? We didn't process the soil to remove the coal tar. We just buried it somewhere else
Wow.
in a place with they call it a hazardous waste landfill. It has a nice liner, deep clay underneath, so there's no worry about leachate leaving the site. So we were digging up sites and burying them on other sites. And so this was fun work for civil engineers and geologists who, liked running digging equipment. And they would figure out where the problems were, and then they would dig, and then you would do testing to find out if you got it all, and so on. But what struck me as incredibly ridiculous is that at the same time that this was going on, it was legal to buy a product that allowed you to ingest those same compounds. They're called cigarettes. And people were
Right.
dying left and right because they were actually being exposed to the same chemicals.
Right.
And yet we're spending millions of dollars to clean up sites where people weren't being exposed to them. They were buried in the ground. They weren't hurting anybody. They weren't moving. They weren't getting into the groundwater.
Right.
Nothing was wrong. It was just there, you know? And yet we were letting people. So it seemed that we had split personality disorder as a society about these issues. And it got really troublesome. So eventually I left that industry and I joined a company that designs and builds pilot plants for the chemical process industry. And there I really got to develop my skills. And the nature of that business is people would have something working in the laboratory, or they would have an old technology and they want to make changes to it to make it better, to reduce waste, to reduce energy use, to make profit, where improve the profitability, make specific molecules, change which molecules they make, change which feedstock they use. Anyway, every kind of thing you can think of. And when they do that, if they have the thing working in the laboratory, they have to get it to scale. So there's a step in the middle that involves getting all the data and minimizing the risk of jumping to build a big plant and then finding out it doesn't work. Some fundamental problem is there that wasn't clear from the laboratory. And so they would come to us, and we were world experts at designing and building these plants that could range from something that would fit in my office here to something that looks like a full-size chemical plant. And we would design and build them and manage all of that risk associated with not knowing things completely, and do it really fast because they're usually in a big hurry. They're excited, about some new technology. But during that time, something would happen again and again. And remember, I'm still a person at that time thinking about environmental issues and very worried about climate change. Smart people, motivated, creative people would come in all the time and they would say, we've got this great idea. We can decarbonize this thing, whatever it is, X, whatever X is. And all we need is $50 per ton of CO2 emissions, carbon tax, and we're going to beat the black competition that makes all the emissions because their product will be burdened with the cost of all of that CO2, and ours won't be. And so we would build them a pilot plant, and they would run the plant, and they would find out what's really going on, and they would say, oh, well, maybe it's $80 a ton, not 50. Because in reality, things aren't quite as good as the spreadsheet said it was going to be, or the thermodynamic model said it was going to be. And then they would build something, maybe, and hoping that the carbon tax would come, and it never came, and they would go broke, right? Because otherwise you're trying to sell the X to people that don't care about whether it's clean or not, just how many dollars per kilogram it costs, right? And the first time that happens, you get a little disappointed. You think, oh well, that's sad.
But eventually it
The
happened in
world.
Canada, right?
Oh yeah, we now have a carbon tax. It's a whole $60 a ton.
Right.
60 whole dollars a ton. It's headed to $170 a ton, and at
I
$170
was
a
reading
ton in
somewhere they are
2030.
looking at or considering even to take it to $200 a ton.
No, it's 170 Canadian a ton is the current target for 2030. It's going up gradually. And
Okay.
so this is great. Eventually it'll start to make sense. But my point is that with no carbon tax, people trying to decarbonize anything were misunderstanding the problem. They were thinking that this was a technology problem. Environmental problem could be solved with technology, but really it's an economics problem. And the carbon
Right.
tax, it will really help. And the thing about the Canadian one that a lot of people don't realize, we were told as a Canadian public, we were told loudly and shrilly by lots of people that we would never have a carbon tax in Canada because there would be protests in the street. These people with the yellow jackets, like in France, the gilets jaunes would be in the street protesting. We could never do it. Right. And we have this American neighbor and they don't like taxes of any kind, and carbon tax is bad because it's a tax. So, and we have to trade with them, so we can't have a carbon tax and so on. And not only did we do it, we did it. It survived 2 federal elections. It survived a Supreme Court challenge by some premiers who didn't like the idea that the federal government had the right to tax something that was of federal interest. And people like it. Now, they don't like taxes, but what I mean by like it is that they don't find it offensive. And the reason they don't find it offensive is the clever way that it was done. Instead of taking the money and putting it in the government general revenue, where it gets used for schools and hospitals and this sort of thing, and nobody really knows what happens to it, right? Instead, what they did is they put it in a big pile. They take 10% off the top and they use that for the decarbonization of public infrastructure at the federal level, right? And a little bit of that 10% is used for administration of the program because it costs money to collect money.
But does it, honestly speaking, does it really help with so little countries doing it? Right?
Yeah, absolutely it does. But it's just getting started, and it's a necessary but insufficient criteria. So let me finish.
It's one world, right?
Well, like I said, let me finish, and I'll explain to you why. For instance, the key is people will not accept it if it's done wrong. Here's how it's done right. Okay, the 90% of the money that's left is now they just take how many taxpayers there are, divide that into the amount of money, and they give everybody a check. Okay, they give the money back. Now, here's how it works. Here's how people go, oh, this is stupid. They take money and give it back. Oh, this is stupid. No, it's not stupid. It's very smart. Here's how it works. Let's say that you live 5 kilometers well, let's say you live 5 kilometers from me here in public housing. Okay, you're poor. You live in a small, publicly subsidized apartment. You can't afford a car. You walk or you take the transit everywhere, right? Your emissions are very low, very low, okay? Because you don't have any money, so spending money you can't do it. You don't have it. Well, now you get a check back that's way more money than you paid in extra on your food and your transit and whatever other things that cost more because the carbon tax. You are rewarded for having a low emissions lifestyle. Now, let's say you live 5 kilometers in the other direction, you live in a very rich neighborhood, and you have a 5,000 square foot house and several big cars, and you have a place in the north, cottage, a big motorboat, and you buy a lot of gasoline, you pay a lot of heating. Well, you have a lot of money. So if you want to avoid paying the carbon tax, you have all the capital in the world necessary to invest in a heat pump, invest in an electric vehicle, make changes to your lifestyle so that your emissions are lower. If you don't want to pay the tax, you have options because you have money, right? And so this is why the tax is accepted. Now, to your question, yeah, it's a global world. How do you get the people in the world that don't care, who have other priorities, or who just think the whole thing is just a waste of time and not worth bothering? How do you get them to participate? And the answer is border taxes, border adjustments, tariffs. And that's what the EU is going to be doing. So the EU has put in place carbon taxing on their own citizens, and it's it varies from country to country because there's some sovereignty still among countries, and it's very effective in some places and less effective in others. But what they're going to do is they're going to make sure that nobody can bring in goods from other nations and not charge a carbon tax and outcompete the local goods. Okay, because this is a matter of basic fairness. So let's say the lowest carbon tax in Europe is $30 a ton. Nobody is going to be able to bring in goods unless they bear an equivalent $30 a ton in source carbon tax from their own nation. Otherwise, they're cheating. They're making emissions in their country and then selling the goods into a place that their goods cost a premium because of carbon tax and getting a cheating advantage, right? And so that's how you get people that don't want to comply, because politicians don't like to charge their population's taxes because the population gets angry at them and says, you raise the tax, I don't like you, right? But the only thing they hate more than saying I'm sorry, we have to tax you, is when some other government gets to collect the tax from their citizens.
Right. Well,
that's much worse.
India is doing it something very, very unique. They just made legalized carbon trading here.
Oh yeah. See, I don't like
it was
carbon
not
trading
legal till recently.
I don't like carbon trading quite so much because the nice thing about a carbon tax is that it's conceptually simple and very difficult to defraud. Whereas carbon trading, there's all kinds of games that can be played. An industry can snuggle up to the government and say, look, we need no carbon tax in order to survive. We are a legacy employer. We have a lot of jobs and we don't want to pay anything. So grandfather us. And the government goes, oh, okay, you guys are special. Yeah. And then another thing that happens is that people make up kind of nonsense ideas like, oh, I have a forest and I'll cut it down. I'll cut the forest down unless you pay me something for the value of the forest in carbon credits. This sort of stuff is not, the atmosphere is not fluid.
Some of these things, see, in India, a forest is a national property. No private individual or an entity can own a forest.
I see.
So
yeah. So the thing is that people all over the world are playing these games where they say, oh, well, we could convert this land that's covered in trees, we could convert it to agricultural land, and of course there's going to be emissions associated with that. And if you pay me, then I won't do that today.
Right.
Later when the agricultural land is worth more, then I'll do it anyway. And nothing.
Yes.
No way you can.
Yeah, true. Unfortunately, today India is looking at becoming replacing or challenging China's status as a manufacturing capital of the world. Right? India wants to attract more manufacturing.
And by the way, I would encourage that wonderfully. I would encourage that wonderfully because not only is India not only is India a much more friendly and comfortable nation in terms of being a member of the community of nations, but it's not run by a totalitarian regime like China.
Correct.
So there's the rule of law in India. It's a big, complicated society with 1.4 billion people now?
We just crossed Chinese population, so we are the most populous country in the world now.
So it's a big, complicated place, and it's not perfect like every place, just like Canada is far from perfect, but at least it has a functioning civil court system. When you go, if you have a dispute with somebody in India, you can go to India and try to get relief from the courts there. You go to China and they put you in jail.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So yeah, well, it depends who you're suing, right? If you sue the wrong people, bad things happen. So anyway, so you were saying India wants to challenge China, and of course India
that's a good side, like you mentioned, and also perhaps good for much of India because it's going to create more economy, more wealth, more jobs,
Yeah.
all those things. But the other side of it would be that we will see uh, uh, a lot of closed eyes towards some of these effects, right? In
And a
terms of
lot of coal being burnt, a lot of coal
correct.
being burnt because India.
India has created a lot more greener power. India is, I think, the largest solar power generator in the world today in terms of amount of solar power generators and coming up and existing. I think India will become the largest producer of solar energy in the world. And we've also got 36 nuclear power plants coming up. So, I don't know your stand on nuclear power, nuclear energy,
Oh,
but
well, my feeling about nuclear power is really clear. If you think you can afford it, you should build it.
okay. Well,
So, you know,
India will have 36. I think we already have two or three, and now we will have 36 in the next 20 years or so.
yeah,
So,
you remember you're talking to a Canadian, and we don't forget about that stuff either. There was some nuclear technology bought from Canada, and then it was used to make nuclear weapons. So
uh,
it
uh,
was something that wasn't very popular at the time, and
oh
led
well,
to a
that's
relationship
true.
in
That
Canada for
did
a long time.
happen, but see, I think today we don't have to establish nuclear power plants for any other purpose because that is anyway taken care of. But India is
Like I
going
said,
towards that.
my only problem with nuclear now is that it's difficult to afford and it takes too long to build. Even,
Correct.
so there are disadvantages, obviously, to a totalitarian regime. I mean, it's not a place that the world really wants to do business with for a variety of reasons that I mentioned. But one of the advantages of being a totalitarian regime is you would think that you can do things fast, right? I mean, the Chinese built a COVID
Right.
hospital in, right? But it
Correct.
still takes the Chinese 5 years to make a nuclear power plant.
Oh, but it still takes more for India, right? We had a nuclear power
Oh
plant
my
coming
goodness,
up, and
yeah,
for
10.
3 years it was only protest for 3 years. Nothing could move
Yeah,
there.
yeah. Yeah, I
So,
know. And Canada, believe me, we looked at it, and so we have lots in Ontario. We have 55% of our electricity comes from these big CANDU facilities that we built in the 1970s and 1980s. And we looked the last one that we built, Darlington, was 4 times over budget by the time it was done.
mm,
4 times over budget. And we looked recently, 2013, I think, at twinning that facility, doubling it, putting another 4 reactors. And the prices in response to that request for proposal came back so high. Everybody said, okay, we're done. Forget it. It doesn't make sense. It's too expensive. We can't do that anymore. And so a kind of forward-thinking government at the time decided, well, let's build an industry, a wind and solar industry in Ontario. How are we going to do that? Well, it's just getting started out. So what we'll do is we'll put forward these feed-in tariffs. We'll pay really good prices for this electricity. Any solar, any wind electricity you could make, we'll pay really good prices for it. But only if you get the best price if you meet a certain percentage Ontario content. So if your solar panels are assembled in Ontario and the racking is made in Ontario and all the labor to install it is obviously done in Ontario, then you get a good price for your electricity. And
right.
Japan went, hey, hold on a second, we don't like this program. So they went to the World Trade Organization and they said, hey, these Canadians, they're cheating. They don't let us sell our solar panels. These people can't buy our solar panels because they don't get the good price for the electricity. And the World Trade Organization said, yeah, you're right. This is cheating. So Ontario has no solar industry anymore. We tried. We spent a lot of money on it. You travel in the rural areas, you see all kinds of little solar installations where people were harvesting money from this government program. And they're still working. They make a little bit of electricity, but the notion was we were going to build an industry, local industry that was going to supply the energy, and it would be cheaper than building new nuclear plants. And of course, we tried, but the world wouldn't let us do it.
Right. Oh, well, yeah, I would not indulge in that direction because we'll go in a different
Oh yeah,
direction with
my
the
goodness, we could have a
conversation.
long talk, but alcohol would
Yeah.
probably be involved.
Sure. So, Paul, what is it that you're doing now that you think will have significant impact in the future?
Okay, so I guess what I have to do is I kind of have to finish the story. So I was talking
Yeah,
about how I
please.
worked at, yeah, I worked for this company for 26 years that designed and built pilot plants. And I during my latter time there, I was getting more and more involved on my own time in um, issues related to decarbonization because I thought, well, we really need some clear voices that understand the issues and are not afraid to speak their mind. Because, I can understand there are a lot of people that are singing for their supper, right? Their employer gets angry with them if they say the wrong thing. Some of them even have signed documents that say you won't say anything negative about this or that on the public stage. So they're muzzled, and I was not muzzled. I signed a 1-page document when I joined my company. It was only 20 people at the time. And so I was free and I owned part of the company. So it was kind of hard for them to say to me, look, you shouldn't say this. This is, we have customers that don't like you to say those things. So I felt that I had the responsibility to use that opportunity because I knew some things. Like, for instance, I watched this hydrogen hyperbole epidemic growing again. Oh, my goodness, this crazy stuff again. And I understood intrinsically why this was a problem and a waste of time and energy. And so I felt that I had a responsibility to speak out. And so last year, I decided to leave my employer and go out on my own as a consultant. And what I'm doing now is I'm specifically focusing on helping people develop technology and to make investments in decarbonization related technology. And so I help investors make sense of whether inventors really have something, and I help inventors make the right measurements and develop their technology in the right order with the right steps of the right size, gather good data, and all of those sorts of things. And I
Paul,
do
can
that
you
on a
be
strictly
little
for
more
hire basis.
specific? Can you be little more specific when you say
Yeah, yeah. Well, I can give you
decarbonization
examples.
is really broad? Yeah.
Yeah, well, I can give you examples. So decarbonization is, people are very creative. If you motivate them with the right financial incentives, like a carbon tax as an example, people come up with all sorts of things that we can do differently, we can do better. So for instance, among my clients, and I can't talk in specifics because of non-disclosure agreements, but among my clients are people doing a wide variety of different things. So as an example, I have clients that are developing battery materials.
Okay.
And they're scaling up that process. They want to go into large scale production and they need help with that. I have clients who are working on new processes for making lightweight materials for use in battery electric vehicles and aircraft and this sort of thing, in order to, because in those applications weight matters to energy efficiency and that matters to cost, because the less efficient, the bigger battery you need in order to achieve the
Right.
same goal. I have a client, little company, that's developing technology to remove methane and CO2 from water that's collected behind dams in tropical environments, so warm hydropower. The trouble with hydropower in warm climates is that all of the material that used to just flow down the river and go to the oceans, some of that would become ocean sediments and not degrade. If it's allowed to accumulate in a reservoir, it can make some methane, and methane is a very powerful greenhouse gas. So these guys are trying to capture the methane and use it for energy to at least convert it to CO2 so that it doesn't end up in the atmosphere as methane. I have clients that are developing hydrogen technology. Hydrogen electrolyzers in particular are a big thing because we need to replace all of this hydrogen that's made from fossil fuels that we'll need in a decarbonized future, not to waste it as a fuel. That's something silly and that we can talk about in detail later.
Oh,
But
maybe, yeah, we can talk about the blue hydrogen and green hydrogen.
yeah, we can talk about that. Oh, and I have clients also. I guess a past client who developed a technology for making a valuable carbon product with hydrogen as a byproduct using pyrolysis. But anyway, I have a long list. I have clients that are involved in lawsuits, that I can't talk about. I have clients that are developing carbon capture technology with these byproducts that are quite interesting. There's a million things that I'm
So,
doing.
with
And
all these efforts, Paul, what are you looking to achieve? Is it something that you want to say that you want to leave a clean world behind? What exactly are you trying to achieve?
okay, so decarbonization is not something that anybody wants. Okay, it's something that we
Right,
need.
it's need, yeah.
So needing it, I've spent a fair bit of effort trying to teach my kids the difference between needs and wants. And we need to live on a planet with a stable climate. That's not something we want, it's something we need. Okay. And so we need to stop burning fossils as fuels. That's essential. So am I helping with that? Yeah, of course, as much as I possibly can, because we need it as a society. What we also need, though, is we need to be clear about what'll help and what won't. Okay. And there's lots of stuff being pitched that cannot help. That's worthless.
Is
And
there
that
somebody who got you thinking into this direction? Somebody who was influential in you think of work?
a particular person, no, many people, but myself included, because I've been thinking about these issues, like I said, since
You're a
my
teenager.
university days. Yeah, exactly, since my university days. And I here's a little anecdote, a little story that I think will help. When I was doing my master's degree, there was an old drunk of a professor that decided to hold a departmental seminar in chemical engineering department about what to do with all of this CO2, because clearly the CO2 was a problem. Okay, so
Let's make more
as you
beer.
will, yeah, well, there you go. It gets there. Beer is involved, believe me.
Okay.
But a bunch of most of the grad students were there, and a bunch of the faculty as well. So it was actually a very well attended event because people were concerned and wanted to see what could be done, what kind of creative solutions people could come up with. And so he starts the session, and people are kind of brainstorming. Well, you could do this. And then someone else would say, well, yeah, that would be great, except thermodynamics causes you this problem. And they would explain, oh, okay. Well, you could do this. Yeah, but thermodynamics and so on. So eventually the old professor, he gets rather frustrated and he says, look, this is a brainstorming session. Put thermodynamics aside for a minute and we'll come up with some ideas. And to which my brilliant friend, who I'm still friends with, she said, well, if you put thermodynamics aside, then we'll just make diamonds and oxygen, you know, and we'll go to the grad club and have a beer because the whole problem is solved then, right? And but here's the thing: what Landon was saying, the point she was making all those years back, was that why are we making CO2? For thermodynamic reasons. Because if we take a fuel containing carbon and hydrogen and we burn it to CO2 and water, those products have a low chemical potential energy. Okay, think about the potential energy like the position of a rock. A rock up on the top of the hill, that's a fuel. Okay, the rock at rest at the bottom of the hill, that's CO2 and water. And the difference between the heights is the potential energy. And so her point was that if you're going to take the rock from the bottom of the hill and push it all the way to the top to make diamonds and oxygen, this is obviously something that's going to have a big energy input. In fact, more energy than you got out when you rolled the rock down the hill. And so this is a rather obvious problem. So all these people that are talking about CO2 recycling and e-fuels, where they're going to take CO2 and water and make fuels out of them using electricity, they need a lesson in thermodynamics. And that's the fundamental problem. Over here, we're burning fossils to make energy and CO2 and water. And over there, we have this excess of electricity in some form, wind, solar, whatever. And we're thinking to take CO2 and water and make fuels. Well, you know what the obvious solution is? Take here and there, connect with a wire, and throw away the CO2 and the water. Don't bother with it. They're just middlemen. They're stealing from you. They're middlemen. You cut them out. Cut out the middlemen. And so, yeah, there's a lot of very unserious thinking, I would say, sometimes motivated by a sincere desire to decarbonize, but maybe not the clearest thinking. And sometimes motivated by a desire that has nothing to do with decarbonization. It has to do with predatory delay. Okay, putting off decarbonization for as long as possible so that they can make money from their fossil fuel infrastructure for as long as possible.
Right. Is there a book, podcast that you follow or you want to recommend to our listeners?
Here's the thing I can recommend that people do. This was an eye-opener for me when I first came across it. It's very out of date, and it has some fundamental issues and problems associated with the simplifications that are used in writing it, but it's still worth reading, and it's absolutely free. It's called Sustainable Energy Without the Hot Air. If you just go to, I think it's withouthotair.com, you'll find this book. It's written by the late David Mackay, who was a UK academic and advisor to government. And what he did is he did an energy accounting exercise that's really quite interesting and amusing. He looked at how much energy we use for each kind of thing, and how much energy we could possibly make, forget about economics, in the UK as an example. And he made ledgers, on one side, energy consumption, on the other side, energy production. And then he said, okay, make them match. I don't care how you make them match, just make them match. You don't like nuclear? Energy generation goes down. Now your energy use has to go down. Figure out what you don't want. Right now, what I said is that it's out of date, and he makes a mistake, not really a mistake, but a simplification assumption that has an effect on the results. And that is that, the late David Mackay committed what I call the second sin of thermodynamics. Okay. And Michael Liebrecht puts it another way I like very well. He said recently that, the joule is a unit of energy, right? And he said that all joules are created equal. 1 joule is a joule, right? But some joules are more equal than others. So he used the reference from Animal Farm by George Orwell, which is one of my favorite books. Where the pigs who have taken over change the rules. All animals are created equal, but some animals are more equal than others, and that means the pigs can be the boss, right? So all joules are created equal, but some are more equal than others. And what's meant here by this whole thing is that energy is denominated in joules, and heat is energy, and light is energy, and electricity and mechanical energy are energy. And they're all measured in joules, but that doesn't mean they're worth the same. Not even close. The analogy I use is dollars, okay? So we have a unit of money, $100. So it's a unit of money denominated in dollars. That's not enough information. I didn't tell you, are they American dollars or are they Jamaican dollars? Okay? So the analogy is heat, like heat to heat your home. as an example. Heat is like Jamaican dollars, and electricity is like American dollars. Yeah, they're both dollars, they're both joules or kilowatt hours or whatever, but heat is almost worthless compared to electricity, because we can use electricity to do something like run a heat pump, and for every joule of electricity we put in, we get 3 or 4 joules out in heat. You know, there's an exchange rate, just like between American dollars and Jamaican dollars is an exchange rate. And so the thing that David Mackay does in his book is he converts everything to kilowatt hours per person per day, and he takes heat as worth the same as electricity, and mechanical energy is not the same. And
Interesting. I'll look that up as well.
The great good news about this fact is that when you don't do that, when you don't do this sloppy accounting, the problem of decarbonization becomes 1/2 to 1/3 as difficult. When you look at, you can look at a diagram that they call a Sankey diagram. The Sankey diagram shows the flows of energy from place to place, right? There's a beautiful Sankey diagram that's done by the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratories. And it shows all of the energy used in the United States. And of that energy, there's a huge light gray box there that's called rejected energy. And this is all the energy that was heat that got wasted in the conversion to make work, to make electricity or mechanical energy. And in a decarbonized future, this gray box almost disappears. So we only have to make 1/2 to 1/3 as much energy if we make it as electricity than if we started with chemical energy to make heat.
Right. But yeah, I'll come to it.
But anyway, sustainable energy without the hot air is worth the read. Number one, because the first chapter explains in detail, with references, why global warming is a real problem, why we're causing it, and why we can't ignore it. Okay? Right. And then he says, okay, this is real. Global warming is real. What do we do about it? And now he does the accounting. And he makes it clear that, you know, changing our relationship with energy, totally changing our relationship with energy is not going to be easy. It's possible, but not easy. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be cheap. And it's going to require some compromise. You know, there's some things that we take for granted today that in the future are going to be either very expensive or just not allowed, not possible anymore. And that's a reality that people have to just, you know, they have to be adult and realize that, you know, we can't do that anymore. I can give you another example, something that happened like that in the past. In the past, they discovered that making good quality, high octane gasoline took a lot of effort, took a lot of energy and money, capital equipment, and that there was a cheat that you could use to fix this problem. You could, as an example, put tetraethyl lead in gasoline, and that would make bad gasoline into good gasoline. And so we did that for decades and decades. And eventually we went, it's lead. It's lead. It's contaminating everything and everyone with lead. Better stop doing that. So what we didn't do is say, well, but gasoline being cheap is important, so let's keep using the lead, right? What they did is they banned it. They said, no, you can't do this anymore because it's killing people. In fact, it's making children dumber. You know, it's dropping IQ in the population. And here's the problem. We have people in the world who seem to think that we can't take action on climate change of this regulatory nature because, you know, it's ideologically the wrong thing to do. And what I always remind them is, let's say that today someone opened up a gasoline station, and at the gasoline station they have 2 pumps. One is for the good quality, low sulfur, high octane gasoline we make today. And right next to that pump is a pump with a leaded gasoline, and it's 20% less expensive. And that's probably not too far off correct, okay? And they hang a great big sign above that pump, and it says, please don't buy this gasoline. Even though it's cheaper, please don't buy it because it will give your children brain damage. How many people do you think would buy it? Almost everyone would buy it. almost everyone would buy it.
Isn't
They would
that
feel
how
guilty.
even cigarettes
They,
are being sold with the same messaging, but people still buy?
well, you see, this is the thing. People imagine that people, out of the goodness of their heart, out of a desire to be virtuous, to live in a nicer way on the planet, that they will make voluntarily decisions that cost them more money, okay, but voluntarily. And the old option will still be there. And they won't choose it, even though it's cheaper. This is stupid. People don't work that way. Okay. Now,
Right.
if they'll pay, some people will pay a little sometimes to feel better about something. But when you're talking about a commodity like gasoline, like I said, if there's two pumps and the one is 20% cheaper, guaranteed people will buy it. There's no question.
Sure.
So you have to take the choice away at a certain point. Even the pricing signal isn't enough. Okay. So let's say that you put a tax on the leaded gasoline and you made it 40% more expensive. Then people would see the sign and they'd see it's more expensive. They go, oh, why would I buy that garbage? I'll buy this other stuff over here. It does the same job. It's cheaper.
This is exactly what Singapore is doing anyway. Right.
So you see, this is the thing. People have to understand it's an economic problem, and
Correct.
you can't solve an economic problem with technology. Because if the economics aren't there, the technologists can't make money, and so they work on something else.
Totally. Well, Paul, thank you so much. Uh, this is crazy. I mean, we typically do this piece of podcast where we try to understand your journey, but more than the journey, we got the way you're thinking, and most important thing is that now it's really exciting, and I'm sure all our listeners and audience would also want to come back to listen to uh, the next part of the conversation that we want to have in terms of why you know from going towards decarbonization to even dehydrogenation as far as an option for automobile. So and also perhaps I would want to also ask you uh, the hopium part of it. I mean, how did you come
Yeah,
up with that? So,
sure. I can spend a
I
minute.
would want to, yeah, please go ahead.
I can just spend a minute and explain what I mean by that. So I didn't invent this idea. This idea of hopium has been floating around since at least the first time that Obama ran for president.
Okay.
And so the idea is that people's hope becomes a drug. And
Always.
that drug, if you administer that drug, it's useful to shut off people's brain,
Right.
okay, and make them do what you want them to do. And that's what I'm referring to as hopium. And so there are lots of ideas in the decarbonization space that don't make any sense. They're fundamentally foolhardy, but they're being peddled as if they're solutions. And unfortunately, this hope that people have is being used to lull them into a false sense of security and to separate them from their money. And if it's individuals and they're wealthy, separating them from their money doesn't trouble me that much. If they want better advice before they make their investments, they can hire it. I mean, you can hire people like me as an example, and they can make better decisions. But the problem is that these seducers who are administering the hopium, they're administering it to governments. And they're taking our
Oh.
collective tax money and wasting it on things that aren't going to help with decarbonization.
Mhm.
And on top of it, so you have the hopium dealers and the hopium pushers, right? The people that are selling the hopium, right? Oh, hydrogen, don't worry about fossil fuels, we can use hydrogen. Where does hydrogen come from? Oh, 99% fossil fuels, but whatever. And then the same thing, you have other people. Oh, I have this great idea for energy storage. I'm going to raise and lower weights on a crane.
Right.
All right, give me $150 million.
All right. Well, Paul, I want to hold you there, hold the thought here, because I want to use that as a teaser for listeners to come to the next part. And
Oh, we can
uh,
talk about all of those
yeah,
hopium addicts
yeah,
and all of that crazy stuff next
right.
time. Yeah.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much. And for the listeners and audience, do look up. The link is there below. And do understand there are blogs written by the links to the website. And there are a
Yep.
lot of his thoughts. There are also podcasts are there
Spitfire.
that he has spoken. So look up. The links are given below the podcast. And I'm sure you will come back to get the next conversation with Paul soon. All right. And till we meet again,
Spitfireresearch.com. That's where you need to
yes,
go, and you'll find out everything about this stuff. And you find my LinkedIn profile, and I've got about 30 articles there with references that explain why I believe what I do.
fantastic. And till then, enjoy the ride.
All right. Cheers.